The morning I came to collect my ex-wife's house debt, I expected tears, anger, maybe even a slammed door. What I did not expect was to find her standing barefoot on the porch in the bright daylight, holding a stack of unpaid bills in one trembling hand and a little boy hiding behind her dress, staring at me like I was the answer to a prayer nobody had dared to speak. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the strange ways life brings broken people back together, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Unsent Truth for more emotional stories that remind us humanity still exists. My name is Kaveh, and for almost 5 years I told myself I had forgiven my ex-wife, Syra, but the truth was uglier than that. I had not forgiven her. I had simply buried the pain deep enough to function. I worked long days managing property loans for a small finance company, drove home through the same streets every evening, ate alone, slept badly, and pretended peace was the same thing as silence. When Syra and I divorced, she kept the little blue house on Marigold Lane because I thought it was the decent thing to do. She loved that house more than anything. She had painted the kitchen cabinets yellow, planted lavender beside the fence, and once told me she wanted to grow old there, watching the afternoon sun fall across the living room floor. Back then, I believed I would be sitting beside her when that happened. But marriage does not always break in one loud crash. Sometimes it dies quietly, one cold dinner, one unanswered message, one exhausted argument at a time. We lost a pregnancy in our 3rd year together, and something inside both of us changed. I turned into a man who buried himself in work because grief felt too large to face. Syra turned into a woman who smiled less every month, who stopped singing in the kitchen, who stared at baby clothes in shop windows like she was looking at a life stolen from her. Instead of holding each other, we blamed each other. Instead of grieving together, we became strangers sharing a roof. By the time she asked for the divorce, I was too proud to beg and too wounded to admit I still loved her. Years passed. Then one Monday, her file landed on my desk. 3 missed payments. Final warning. Foreclosure review. The address made my chest tighten before I even saw her name. Marigold Lane. The Blue House. My boss, Mr. Voss, told me to handle it personally because I knew the property history. He said it without emotion, tapping the folder with his pen, reminding me that business was business and sentiment did not pay debts. I nodded like a professional, but my hands felt cold. All morning, I stared at that file, telling myself I was only doing my job. She owed money. The company had rights. I would go there, explain the process, collect what I could, and leave. It was a bright day, the kind of day that makes every painful thing feel almost rude. Sunlight poured across the pavement. Children rode bicycles somewhere down the street. A delivery truck hummed at the corner. The blue house looked smaller than I remembered, but also more tired. The lavender along the fence had grown wild. The paint on the porch rail had peeled. One window had a crack taped in the shape of a crooked star. I parked across the street and sat there for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself I was not afraid. Then I walked up the path with the folder under my arm. When Syra opened the door, the years between us disappeared and returned at the same time. She looked older, but not in a bad way. Life had softened and sharpened her. There were shadows beneath her eyes, and her hair was tied carelessly at the back of her neck. She wore a faded green dress and no shoes. For 1 second, neither of us spoke. Behind her, the house smelled faintly of toast, medicine, and lemon soap. Then a small boy peeked from behind her, no more than 4, with serious brown eyes and a toy truck clutched to his chest. I had prepared a speech. It vanished. Syra knew why I had come. I saw it in the way her face changed when she noticed the folder. Shame passed over her like a cloud. She stepped outside and pulled the door half closed behind her, as if hiding the house from me might protect what little dignity she had left. She told me she knew she was behind. She said she had tried to call the office. She said there had been hospital bills, lost work, repairs she could not afford, and delays with a childcare subsidy that never came on time. Her voice stayed calm, but her fingers crushed the corner of the envelope in her hand. I asked who the boy was, though part of me feared the answer. She looked back through the gap in the door, and her expression changed into something fierce and tender. His name was Arais, she said. Her nephew. Her sister had died 2 years earlier after a short illness, and Syra had taken him in because there was nobody else. That single sentence broke something open in me. I remembered her younger sister vaguely, a laughing girl with bright scarves and big dreams. Now she was gone, and Syra had been raising her child alone inside the house we once promised would be full of children of our own. I should have stayed professional. I should have handed over the notice and left. But then Arais slipped out from behind the door and placed his toy truck on the porch between us, like an offering. He looked up at me and asked if I was the man who was going to take their house. Syra closed her eyes as if the words had hit her physically. The question landed in my chest with the weight of every mistake I had ever made. I crouched down, but I could not answer quickly. Because on paper, yes, I was that man. In that moment, under the clean daylight, I was the stranger carrying a folder that could erase the only home that child knew. Syra sent Arais inside, then turned back to me. Her pride was still there, but it had cracks now. She told me she had something to offer, just not money. I almost laughed from the shock of it, but she raised her eyes and said she meant work. She had been baking from home for neighbors, small cakes, lunchboxes, pastries, anything people ordered. The kitchen was old, the oven unreliable, but people liked her food. She said if the company could give her 90 days, she could catch up. She would sign anything, take extra cleaning jobs, rent out the back room, do whatever it took. Then her voice dropped, and she said the words that changed everything. She said she did not want charity from me, but if I remembered even one good thing about the woman she used to be, she was asking me not to let a little boy lose another home. I stood there with the folder under my arm, feeling suddenly ashamed of the man I had become. I had spent years turning my hurt into armor. I had told myself Syra was part of my past, that her problems were not mine, that fairness meant keeping distance. But there she was, not asking me to love her, not asking me to save her, only asking me to see her. And maybe that was what hurt the most. Because I had stopped seeing her long before the divorce papers were signed. I went inside to inspect the house, because that was what the job required. The living room was neat but worn. A child's blanket lay folded on the sofa. Crayons sat in a coffee mug. On the wall, beside old framed photographs, was a drawing of 3 stick figures standing under a blue roof. One figure was Syra. One was Arais. The third had no face, only a question mark. I stared at it longer than I should have. In the kitchen, trays of small pastries cooled beside the sink. The cabinets were still yellow, though chipped around the handles. Sunlight came through the window and fell across the counter exactly as it had years ago, and for a moment I saw us younger, laughing over burnt toast, believing love alone could carry us through anything. Then Arais came running in because one of the trays had slipped. Syra moved too fast, caught the edge, and burned her wrist. She tried to hide the pain, but I saw her face tighten. Without thinking, I took her hand and ran cool water over the burn. We stood close, silent, with the water rushing between us. Her hand felt smaller than I remembered. She whispered that she was sorry for everything. Not loudly, not dramatically, just like a tired person placing down a heavy bag. She said after we lost the baby, she had blamed me because blaming me felt easier than drowning alone. She said she had wanted me to fight for her, but she had pushed me away so hard that I finally did what she seemed to want. I had imagined that apology for years, but hearing it did not give me victory. It gave me grief. I told her I had failed too. I told her I had hidden behind work because I was terrified of being helpless. I told her I had mistaken silence for strength. The words came slowly, painfully, but once they started, I could not stop. We did not fix the past in that kitchen. Some things cannot be fixed. But for the first time in years, we stood in the same room without pretending the wound was not there. That afternoon, I returned to the office and did something that could have cost me my job. I filed a hardship extension request, but I did not stop there. I reviewed the loan structure, found an old insurance credit that had never been applied correctly, and discovered that the balance was lower than the foreclosure department had calculated. It was not enough to erase the debt, but it bought time. Mr. Voss was angry. He said I was too close to the case. I said maybe that was exactly why I noticed what others had missed. He warned me not to get personally involved. I said nothing, because I already was. Over the next few weeks, I visited the house often under the excuse of paperwork. At first, Syra treated each visit like an inspection, standing straight, answering questions carefully, refusing tea even when I could see she needed rest. But slowly, the walls lowered. I fixed the porch step because our eyes had tripped on it. Then I repaired the oven door because her baking orders depended on it. Then I helped paint the fence one Saturday afternoon while our eyes chased soap bubbles across the yard. Daylight turned everything golden. Neighbors began stopping by to pick up cakes, and soon Syra's little business had a name written on a chalkboard near the gate. Marigold Kitchen. People came for lemon loaves, chicken pies, cinnamon rolls, and lunch boxes wrapped in brown paper. They stayed because Syra remembered their names, their children's allergies, their favorite flavors. I watched her become alive again, not because I saved her, but because someone finally stood close enough to remind her she was not alone. And somewhere in those ordinary days, my anger began to loosen. It did not disappear all at once. It faded in small moments. Our eyes falling asleep against my shoulder after a long delivery run. Syra laughing when flour dusted my shirt. The three of us eating sandwiches on the porch while the afternoon sun warmed the steps. But suspense has a way of returning just when hope begins to feel safe. Near the end of the extension period, Mr. Voss called me into his office. The company had rejected the full restructuring. Syra still needed a large payment within 10 days, or the foreclosure would proceed. I drove to Marigold Lane with the news sitting like stone in my stomach. Syra listened without crying. That somehow made it worse. She thanked me for trying, then turned away to continue packing pastry boxes, her hands moving with heartbreaking control. Our eyes sat at the table drawing another blue house, this time with smoke coming from the chimney and 3 people in the yard. I could not sleep that night. I kept thinking about the house, the debt, the boy, the woman I had loved, the woman she had become, and the man I still wanted to be. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I sold my old motorcycle, emptied part of my savings, and paid enough toward the arrears to stop the foreclosure. But I did not tell Syra at first. I knew her pride. I knew she would refuse if it sounded like rescue. So I arranged it as a private investment in Marigold Kitchen, with repayment terms so gentle they were almost symbolic. When she found out, she came to my apartment in the middle of a bright afternoon, holding the contract in her hand and shaking with anger and tears. She said I had no right to sacrifice for her. I told her I was not sacrificing for the woman who left me. I was choosing to believe in the woman who stayed when a child needed her. I told her the house had once been our dream, but now it was our eyes' safety, her future, and maybe proof that broken things could still shelter people. She cried then, not softly, but like someone who had been strong for too long. I did not reach for her until she stepped forward. Then I held her, and all the years between us felt both unbearable and holy. Months passed. Marigold Kitchen grew. Syra paid back small amounts whenever she could, even when I told her not to rush. Our eyes started calling me Uncle Kaveh, then sometimes just Kaveh, and one day, while we were planting new lavender along the fence, he asked if people could choose their family after losing one. I looked at Syra, and she looked back at me with tears in her eyes. I told him yes, sometimes they could. Near the end of that summer, under the same daytime sun that had once exposed all our pain, Syra invited the neighbors for a small thank-you lunch in the yard. The blue house looked alive again. The fence was painted. The lavender was blooming. Children ran through the grass. Syra stood near the porch with flower on her sleeve and light in her face. She was not the same woman I had married, and I was not the same man she had left. Maybe that was why hope felt possible. We were not trying to return to the past. We were building something humbler, slower, and more honest. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may be silently waiting for hope, forgiveness, and a second chance of their own. Special request: comment second chances can heal if you believe kindness can rebuild what pain once destroyed. I came to collect my ex-wife's house debt believing I was closing an old chapter. Instead, I found a woman fighting to keep a promise to a child, a home that still remembered love, and a version of myself I thought grief had buried forever. And when the sun set that evening over Marigold Lane, our eyes ran across the yard, grabbed my hand, and pulled me toward the porch where Syra was waiting. For the first time in years, I did not feel like a man returning to what he had lost. I felt like a man arriving exactly where he was meant to be.